Graffiti serves as a creative outlet and gives a voice to many who otherwise might not have one. But when utilizing this outlet, many writers, myself included, have only ever looked to just hit up our names. And in doing graffiti content for the last couple of years, I've seen graffiti criticized almost every day. And while there's other criticisms that I see more commonly, one of the things that I see from time to time is people asking, why don't we as graff writers use graffiti to serve a higher purpose? But what other higher purpose could graff serve, and how do we serve it? But before answering this question, I gotta say, there's another question that needs to be answered first. And that is, why do people feel like graffiti should serve a higher purpose in the first place? And many people in the world feel this way because graffiti is an element of hip-hop. Modern graffiti predates hip-hop culture by a couple of years, but during the early development of both, they became intertwined. The first hip-hop record dropped in 1979, and in 1982, The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five dropped and changed the landscape of hip-hop. And The Message changed the landscape of hip-hop because it was the first record to come out that had social commentary at the core of its lyrics. And by the end of the 80s, you had multiple groups including Run DMC, Public Enemy, and NWA that focused on social commentary that told you about how life was, where they were living, and how things went. These groups were incredibly popular and incredibly influential, and from that time onward, you would see hip-hop artists including political, social, and religious messaging in their music. And especially during the golden age of hip-hop, you didn't see too many artists that didn't have social commentary in their music. And given that graffiti is an element of hip-hop, many people have expected a similar level of messaging in graffiti writers' tags. But as a counter-argument, if you look back at the origins of hip-hop and you go back to those early park jams, what do you see? You don't see people fighting the power, you see people partying. People wanted a place where they could kick it, listen to some music, and dance and express themselves. And at the heart of graff is the same need for self-expression. And this heart of our community beats in the same way as it did at those early park jams, and the way that those people were expressing themselves at those parties is the same way that we express ourselves now when we hit up. But that isn't to say that people haven't or don't use graffiti to shed light on their beliefs. And one of San Francisco's most well-known writers has been doing it since the 80s. Spy One is one of the early pioneers of San Francisco's graff scene. A close friend of the legendary Dream, Spy has been doing both legal and illegal pieces since back in the 80s that highlight his beliefs and spread awareness. But to Spy, this isn't just something to draw on a wall. He talks the talk and walks the walk. And he created the Irie Crew as a way to have writers in the city get together and be peaceful with each other at a very non-peaceful time in San Francisco's history. And if there's something going on in the world, if there's a message that's being suppressed, you can expect Spy to be on his job and put that message out there in an incredibly artistic and dope manner. But San Francisco is far from the only place in the world where this type of messaging has found itself on walls. My father's from the city of Belfast in Northern Ireland, and more specifically, the Lower Falls Road area of West Belfast. And all throughout the area where my father grew up, you see political murals everywhere. These types of murals first popped up in loyalist neighborhoods in the early 1900s and started popping up in Republican and nationalist neighborhoods like my father's in the late 70s. My dad was a pretty artistic dude and still living out there when these murals started popping up, but I have to figure he never worked on one. And that's because some of the other revolutionary activities that he undertook, he spoke on, but he never talked about ever doing any murals in West Belfast. Almost all of these murals that you see are political in nature, and there's a lot of memorials to people especially. And during the Troubles, if the paramilitaries or the RUC or the Army showed up to my dad's neighborhood and tried to paint over one of these murals, it would come at a loss of life. But then again, some of these areas were no-go areas, and if the Army showed up there, that might be a loss of life alone. And if they were going to be in an area like this, they had better stuff to worry about than some Republican mural on a wall. But despite having a lot of respect and appreciation for these murals in my dad's community, in our sense, I don't consider them graff. And in terms of what I would consider them street art, and more specifically, renegade street art. And in my opinion, for graff to be considered truly graffiti, it needs to be done for the sake of doing graffiti itself. And graffiti done in this manner is used as a form of protest every single day in the city of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sao Paulo is currently home to almost 12 million people, and its metro area has almost 21 million. This is an absolute crap ton of people in one place, but Sao Paulo wasn't always this big. However, in the 1940s, people started migrating to Sao Paulo from all over Brazil and also from all over the world. And around the same time, Sao Paulo undertook a massive urbanization project in its city center. This city center was also designed to be solely inhabited by the elite. And in Sao Paulo, this elite was the wealthy, especially white Brazilians and rich European immigrants. And if you were poor, black, indigenous, or all of the above, you were pushed out of this neighborhood and you had two options. You can move to a favela that was close to the city center or move to a peripheral neighborhood very far away from it. When people moved to these peripheral neighborhoods, they found the job market lacking, they found really crappy schools, and they found that these neighborhoods were lacking the social connections people need to pull themselves out of poverty. And to the elites in Sao Paulo city center, they couldn't care less. And their expectations for people living in these neighborhoods were, these people were supposed to go to work, go home, create new workers, don't complain about anything, and especially stay out of sight. Political graffiti had already existed in Brazil before these developments. And after the military seized power in a coup d'etat in the 60s, political graffiti became a more common sight in Brazil. By the 1980s, a very distinct style of graffiti was developed in Sao Paulo called pichação. Many of the original writers in Sao Paulo's scene came out of these peripheral neighborhoods I just spoke on. And it's become a tradition for writers from these neighborhoods to go to the city center and other affluent neighborhoods in Sao Paulo and bomb everything in sight. And for people that the elite of society expects to just work, create more workers, and be invisible, pichação is an explicitly political act. In an interview that I saw with a writer from Sao Paulo, he called his work class warfare. And given the context that his work exists in, I can't look at it any other way. And while there's writers in Sao Paulo's scene like Mia who've included outright messaging at very pertinent locations, for many in the scene, hitting up is seen as praxis enough. But these kind of social conditions aren't limited to Brazil. You find them all over the world. And in 2025, there's plenty out there to be angry about. But aside from raising awareness and bringing light to issues, is there even a higher purpose the graff can serve? And in my mind, it already is. In describing the origins of graff writers in Sao Paulo, I was also describing the origins of many writers elsewhere. And when I got my start as a writer, damn near everybody I wrote with, and myself included, were all living in poverty. We had stigmas applied to us, and we faced a lot of pushback and a lot of ugliness from the system whenever we had to face it. And when you're growing up in circumstances like this, you learn to put a lot of walls up. You learn to block a lot of stuff out. You learn especially not to express yourself and just to hide your true feelings from everybody else, and especially yourself. And if your circumstances are perilous enough, these walls never come down, and you're never in an environment that ever feels safe to lower your guard. And a few times in this video, I've described doing graffiti as an act of creative expression. And in hitting up, what you're doing is getting in contact with the feeling, with the force that's very pure and very honest inside yourself, that's hidden behind multiple walls, and you're taking this feeling and putting it up somewhere. And if you want to truly express yourself, you need to get in contact with this pure and honest place, and you have to smash through every single wall that's blocking this place. And as a kid with so much going on in my life that I had to guard myself from, the only way I could get in contact with this place, this pure and honest place, was by tagging some letters on a bus. And not even on some graff stuff, but just on some life stuff. If you ever want to overcome your circumstances in life, you're going to have to work very hard, you're going to have to get lucky, and you're going to have to meet some people that can help you out. And if you want to be successful, but also be in the place you want to be and be the person who you want to be, you have to be in contact with who you really are. And I'm not saying that graff is going to do this for you, and many of us don't even stay in the mix long enough for graff to do it. But many of us move on to other mediums and other forms of self-expression, and these remain central to who we are in our lives forever. I'm also not trying to justify us being involved in graffiti because of the circumstances we come from. But in looking at why we do what we do, our circumstances that we come out of are impossible to ignore. And in the communities a lot of us come from, you find poverty, you find abuse, and you find neglect. And when it comes to these last two things, you find them in communities like this coming from the state. And if you're my age and you grew up in a neighborhood like this, you grew up in a neighborhood that was having social programming for kids slashed by President Ronald Reagan. And as I said previously, if you're a kid growing up in a neighborhood like this, some letters that are painted on a wall will not hurt you, but damn near everything else in this environment will. And maintaining a connection to something pure and honest is essential for your survival. But even if most of us are just doing graff for the sake of graff, it doesn't mean we can't be politically active. And when the political realities are whack enough, everybody needs to be involved. And back in 2020, things got so whack that I got involved, I busted my own missions, and I'm happy with how it went. But outside of these very intense moments where it's all hands on deck and everybody's needed, I can understand why writers or just anybody coming up in poverty or facing discrimination doesn't want to get involved. And that's because just living your life, going to work, going to school, getting on the bus, talking to the police is a fight already. And this comes on top of the larger fights of just not being invisible or being treated like a human being. And if on top of these existential realities that you have to face every day, if you're looking to get in contact with yourself, that pure, honest feeling that I was talking about, and express it, you're fighting the system doing just that. And to me, that's a high enough purpose already.